Someone was pounding on the door with the urgency of a rescue team. A voice from the corridor of the courthouse called out, "5 minutes, Mark," but I wasn't in danger of drowning. Not in water, at least, but certainly in a sea of starched linen and suffocating expectations. I found my reflection in the mirror. The tailored suit, a charcoal grey wool that was expertly fitted, felt less like formal wear and more like a straitjacket. I wasn't shedding tears or even trembling. I was, however, fighting for breath, like a dreamer on the verge of waking from a nightmare with a scream. I looked down at my shoes. Polished leather Oxfords that pinched my feet. Julie had chosen them. Sophisticated, she'd called them. A crushing weight seemed to collapse my chest. On a nearby table sat a pair of vintage silver cufflinks. They had been my father's. I'd put them on earlier, a symbolic nod of approval from a man who had been gone for 2 decades. "Would you have gone through with this, Dad?" I murmured. "Would you have stood by while I signed my life away just to keep everyone else happy?" The knocking came again. It's time I forced a smile and opened the door. My sister fussed with her dress and told me I looked perfect. Perfect for what purpose, I wondered. As we proceeded down the long hall toward the ceremony room, my legs began to feel unsteady. It wasn't anxiety, it was a sudden, chilling clarity. 20 years of being the good son. The man of the house. The one who forfeited a scholarship because the family needed him. The one who worked overtime so his siblings could pursue their dreams. The one who held down a job and still repaired whatever was broken at home. I had checked every box, done everything that was asked of me. And none of it felt like it belonged to me. The large doors swung open and the seated guests turned to look. Julie was already beside the officiant, her smile the polished, confident one she used in her professional life. She looked impeccable, poised, and utterly sure of herself. But as she took my hand in hers, its touch wasn't warm. It felt heavy, a claim. When I instinctively tried to pull back, just a fraction, her grip tightened as if I were a possession. She leaned close, whispering, "Just breathe, darling." "I have you," I smiled back, but it was all teeth. The officiant began. "We're gathered here today," the words were just noise, floating meaninglessly. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. And then I heard it, my father's voice, not from a memory but from deep within me. "Promise me, Mark, you will live a life that is truly your own." I blinked. The officiant was looking at me. "Mark Marino, do you take this woman?" No, the word escaped my mouth before my brain had even processed the thought. It reverberated through the silent room like a shockwave. There were gasps, then stillness. Julie went rigid beside me. "What?" she hissed. I can't," I stammered, shaking my head. "I am so sorry. I can't do this." I didn't hesitate. I spun around and walked, and then I was running. I bolted down the marble corridor, past the astounded faces of our friends, past my aunt who was clutching her chest, past the ring bearer who stood frozen in confusion. I burst through the front doors into the sweltering New Mexico sun, and by some ridiculous stroke of luck, there was a woman leaning against a dusty pickup truck, plaid shirt, work boots, a half-smoked cigarette dangling from her lips. She arched an eyebrow as I stumbled toward her, my suit jacket askew. "Need a lift?" she said with a smirk. "Please," I gasped. "Anywhere but here." She looked me over for a second, then gave a short nod, flicked her cigarette away, and said, "Get in." I didn't glance back. Not at the courthouse, not at the stunned crowd gathering on the steps, and not at the woman I had almost married. The truck's engine rumbled to life. The wind whipped through the open window, messing up my carefully styled hair and filling my lungs with an air that felt new and clean. I held onto the dashboard, not out of fear, but because for the first time in what felt like my entire life, I was actually moving forward. We drove for what seemed like an eternity, though it was probably less than half an hour. She let me out at the edge of town near a dry riverbed. I climbed out without a word. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Thank you for the escape." She gave me a quick salute and drove off into the twilight. I walked the final mile home, kicking off the painful shoes, feeling the dust cake the bottoms of my socks. My father's adobe house appeared, the same as always. It was dark. He would still be at the courthouse, managing the fallout. I sat down on the porch steps, suit and all. My old orange cat, Trey, emerged from under the porch and hopped onto my lap as if this were a completely normal afternoon. He curled into a ball, his purr a low, steady rumble that grounded me more than anything had in years. My hands were trembling and my heart was pounding. But my lungs, for the first time, felt like they could finally expand. I shut my eyes and spoke into the evening air. "This time, Dad, I made my own choice," Trey purred even louder, as if in agreement. I was awakened by the sound of creaking floorboards from the room above and a sliver of morning sun across my face. For a brief second, I had no memory of the courthouse, the collective gasp of the crowd, or the sound of my own voice shattering decades of compliance. Then my eyes fell on the rumpled suit puddled on the floor, a discarded skin, and it all came rushing back. Trey was still nestled by my feet, a single paw resting on my shin like a furry anchor. I pushed myself up, the old couch groaning in protest. My body ached in ways I didn't anticipate, my shoulders, my chest, my very soul. "What have I done?" I whispered to the empty room. My phone buzzed before the question could fully form. I didn't want to answer, but I did. Mark, pick up the phone. "Aaron, you okay?" That was crazy. "Call me and then my sister." The moment I answered, her voice erupted. "Are you completely insane?" "Hello to you, too, Clarissa," I mumbled, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Dad almost had a stroke." "Julie is mortified. Do you have any idea of the damage you've caused?" My hand tightened on the phone. "Do you?" I countered. There was silence on her end, just the sound of her sharp breathing. I said no, Clarissa. That's it. I said no to a woman I didn't love. "You could have handled it differently. You could have thought it through," she yelled. I did think, I shot back, my voice rising. "For 20 years. Through the scholarship I gave up. Through every weekend I spent fixing your car so you and your husband could go on vacation. Through every single time I put this family's needs before my own." "You're being selfish," she snapped. I closed my eyes. "Good," I said. It's about time I ended the call before I could second-guess myself. My hands were shaking. I tossed the phone onto the cushion and let my head fall back, watching the ceiling fan wobble on its slow, creaky rotation, a perfect match for the turmoil inside me. Later that day, Aaron came by. My best friend since we were kids. He didn't bother knocking, just let himself in carrying a 6-pack of beer and a bag of potato chips. "I had a feeling you wouldn't go through with it," he said, handing me a bottle as if it were a prescription. "You what?" He sat down on the couch, which sank under his weight. "You were sleepwalking through this whole engagement, man," he said, popping open a beer. "You never talked about her. You'd smile, but it never reached your eyes." I stared into my bottle. "Then why didn't you say something?" He gave me a knowing look. "Would you have listened?" I had no answer. The question lingered between us. We sat there for a long time, drinking beer and eating chips, listening to the desert wind outside. Trey hopped up and settled between us, claiming his spot. "You know what?" Aaron said after a while. "You did something brave. You tore up the script. Most people just act out their parts until the curtain falls. Is that what I did?" I asked. "Broke a script." He grinned. "Dude, you set the whole theater on fire." I hadn't told anyone where I was, but someone must have talked. A cousin, a guest who knew where my dad lived. I didn't think she would come for me. I was wrong. That night, just as I was drifting off, the banging began. It wasn't a knock, it was an assault, as if someone intended to smash the door down. Trey shot up, hissing, his tail puffed out like a weapon. I sat up, my heart hammering, and then I heard her voice. "Mark!" Open this door right now. Trey leaped from the couch and planted himself between me and the door, a small, furry sentinel. The pounding intensified. I know you're in there. I backed away toward the kitchen, my hand shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I will break it down, Mark. Don't test me. And then the door splintered inward. She stood in the frame, her elegant clothes disheveled, her breath smelling of wine, her eyes wild. She was nothing like the poised woman I almost married. You humiliated me, she spat, storming inside. Get out, I managed to say, my voice a weak whisper. Or I'm calling the cops. She let out a harsh, cruel laugh. You think anyone is going to believe you? That I, Julie Green, attacked my poor, perfect fiancé. She lunged at me, grabbing my arm. In that instant, everything blurred. Trey launched himself through the air like an orange cannonball, all claws and teeth. He landed on her back with a furious screech. Julie screamed, thrashing wildly. I scrambled for the phone, but she shoved me, hard, and I stumbled back against the counter. Trey raked his claws down her shoulder. With a vicious snarl, she seized him by the scruff of his neck and threw him against the wall. The sound was a sickening thud, followed by a pained cry. My world fractured. No! I screamed, rushing to his still form. But Julie wasn't finished. She grabbed me by my shirt, raising her hand to slap me, and then a voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold as steel. Let go of my son. My father was standing in the shattered doorway, a shotgun leveled directly at Julie's chest. Now! Julie froze. Mr. Marino, are you so much as twitch? My dad said, his voice flat, and you're not walking out of here. We can have a discussion outside. Julie hesitated for a split second, then backed away, muttering curses as she retreated. I fell to my knees beside Trey, my body racked with sobs as I gently cradled his small, limp body. My father knelt beside me, his eyes on the shallow rise and fall of Trey's chest. He's alive, he said. But we need to get him to the vet. I nodded through my tears. Dad, I choked out, I can't stay here anymore. He didn't reply immediately. He just put a firm hand on my shoulder. Then let's go get him help, he said. And after that, we'll figure out the rest. 2 days after bringing Trey home from the vet, he finally managed to lift his head. It was just a small movement, but it felt monumental. I'd been sleeping on a blanket on the floor beside his bed, my hand resting on his back, tracking each breath as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored. The vet had called his recovery a small miracle, bruised ribs and a concussion, but no lasting damage. I wouldn't have cared if he limped for the rest of his days, I just needed him with me. When he blinked up at me that morning, his gaze slow but clear, I felt a shift inside me. The fog of fear began to dissipate, replaced by a feeling I hadn't recognized in years, restlessness. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon and the desert air filled with the scent of sage, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. It was more habit than a plan. I scrolled through junk mail and advertisements until an unread message on a teacher's forum caught my eye. The subject was simple, *position available, rural school, Northern NM star. I clicked it open. It was for a small charter school near Taos, on the edge of tribal lands. They needed a full-time primary teacher. The description emphasized holistic learning, land-based education, and cultural immersion. Housing was included. The post mentioned a need for someone open to non-traditional methods and local spiritual practices. I read it 3, then 4 times. The words on the screen seemed to glow, issuing a dare. *, are you ready for a new life? *, I didn't let myself hesitate. My fingers found the keyboard. I typed a single sentence, *hello, my name is Mark Marino. I'm very interested. Can we talk? I hit send, shut the laptop, and took a deep breath. The next morning, a reply was waiting. *hello Mark. My name is Rose Yazzie. I'm the director of Red Cedar Primary. I would love to speak with you. I stared at her name, then picked up the phone and dialed. Her voice was serene, with a quiet confidence that felt ancient. Why this position? She asked. I had a whole speech prepared about my experience and educational philosophies, but what came out was the truth. Because I want to finally be the teacher I always dreamed I could be. There was a brief silence, followed by a soft, kind laugh. Well, she said, we built this school for people with dreams like that. When can you come for a visit? My hand shook as I jotted down the address. That night, I broke the news to my family. They assumed I was joking. You're moving where? My sister Clarissa demanded, a spoon hovering over her toddler's high chair. To a school near the mountains, I said. They're providing housing. What about us? What about the kids? What about Dad? I looked over at my father, who sat quietly at the table, staring into his cup. Since the night he'd saved me, he'd been quiet, not angry, just weary. You don't even have your own family, Clarissa added, her tone sharp. Now you want to go play teacher in some remote village. Her words stung, not for their cruelty, but for their truth. I had no wife, no kids, no mortgage. I didn't even have a dog, just Trey, who was recovering in the corner, his soft purr a constant comfort. But for the first time, the truth didn't feel like a wound, it felt like a liberation. Exactly, I said. I have nothing tying me down. And I refuse to wake up at 60 having never left the place where my life stalled. Clarissa just rolled her eyes. So dramatic, I turned to my father. Dad, I have to do this. I'll visit. I promise. He was silent for a long moment, then he gave a single, slow nod. I always knew, he said, his voice rough. One day you'd leave. I packed my life into boxes in silence. Old books, teaching plans, Trey's travel crate, a woven bracelet a former student had given me. My brother, Matteo, showed up the night before I was set to leave. You're really doing this? He asked from the doorway, his arms crossed in a poor attempt to look annoyed. You're just going to leave us with Clarissa's drama and Dad's silence? I managed a small smile. You'll manage, he sighed, scratching the back of his neck. You know, I always figured you'd be the one who stayed. I thought so, too, I whispered. He looked down at his feet, then back at me. Good for you, man. At sunrise, I loaded the last of my things into my old car. Trey was meowing his displeasure from his crate. It's okay, buddy, I said, securing his carrier. This time, we're not running from something. We're running to it. I took one last tour of the house. Every room was filled with memories, some sweet, some suffocating. I didn't cry, not even when I passed the mirror in the hall where I'd first seen the stranger in the suit staring back at me. This time, I recognized the man in the reflection. I thought I understood what mountains were. I'd seen them in pictures, from a distance, but nothing had prepared me for the sight that rose up ahead as I drove north. The Sangre de Cristo range wasn't just scenery, it was a living, watching presence. Trey had gone quiet in his carrier on the passenger seat, his head tilted to watch the clouds skim the jagged peaks. With every mile, the air became cleaner, the sky bigger, and it felt as if I were shedding layers of a life I hadn't realized I was carrying. When I finally pulled into the small gravel lot of Red Cedar Primary, the sun was casting long, golden shadows. A man was waiting on the steps, tall with a straight back and a long, dark braid that hung down his back. You must be Mark, he said, extending a hand. His grip was strong, his eyes kind but perceptive. Irenaeus, he introduced himself. Vice Principal. I'm here to get you settled. He spoke with a cadence that seemed rooted in the earth itself. I followed him to a small adobe house next to the school, its roof blending into the hillside. This is yours, he said, unlocking the door. It's simple, but it has good bones inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of sage. Dust motes danced in the light slanting through the deep-set windows. I carefully placed Trey's carrier on the floor. He stepped out, sniffing warily at each floorboard. Irenaeus watched with a hint of a smile. He'll get used to it, he said. Everyone does. Later that evening, he built a fire in the small Kiva fireplace. His movements were practiced and sure. When he was finished, he turned to me. You feel it, Don't you? He asked. I was confused. Feel what? He gestured toward the window. This land. It doesn't just welcome you. It observes you. It waits to see if you are worthy of its stories. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. The next morning, the chill seeped through the thick walls. June in the city meant short sleeves and iced tea. Here, it meant seeing your breath and frost on the window panes. I led up and walked with Irenaeus toward the school. The building itself looked as if it had grown from the ground up, with thick wooden beams and painted tiles set into the adobe walls. Red Cedar is different, he explained as we entered. We teach reading and math, of course. But we also teach our language, our ceremonies, our connection to the land and spirit. The classroom smelled of cedar and damp earth. There were no desks in rows, but round tables, cushions on the floor, and hand-woven tapestries. In one corner stood a large drum, its surface stretched tight with rawhide and decorated with feathers. That is the spirit drum, Irenaeus said, noticing my gaze. A gift from an elder. Here, children learn rhythm before they learn their letters. I reached out and touched its surface. The skin felt warm, almost alive. Irenaeus smiled. If it lets you touch it, that is a good sign. He later showed me to the teacher's lounge, a small room with a worn-out couch, an ancient coffee maker, and a window that perfectly framed the mountains. I sat there for a long time after he left, just breathing, just listening. The following day was my first with the students. 15 pairs of eyes watched me. Most were dark and curious. Some smiled shyly, while others just stared. But one boy didn't look at me at all. He sat in a back corner, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on the window. That's Jaden, Irenaeus had whispered to me earlier. He's a quiet one. His mother is raising him alone. His father left a couple of years back. He doesn't say much. He paused. His mother is Rose, our director. But we don't bring it up unless it's necessary and not formed in my chest. I knew that kind of silence. I avoided calling on him, not wanting to put him on the spot. As the other children shared their stories, drew pictures, and laughed, Jaden just stared out the window as if he were miles away. After class, as the other kids rushed out, Jaden lingered. Without a word, he placed a folded piece of paper on my desk and walked out. I unfolded it. It was a rough, smudged pencil sketch of a mountain with a tiny figure standing beneath it. And next to the figure, a small cat was curled up asleep. I looked from the drawing to the peaks outside my window and felt a quiet whisper inside me, *, this is where it begins, *. It started with Trey. A few weeks in, I was jolted awake by a low, guttural growl I'd never heard from him. He was standing at the foot of the bed, fur on end, his eyes wide. Trey. I whispered. And then the floor shifted. It wasn't a sound or a tremor, but a deep lurch, as if the house itself had taken a sharp breath. The windows rattled, and a few books tumbled from a shelf. I scooped up Trey, threw on a jacket, and ran outside. Other people were already gathering, wrapped in blankets. An old man from across the way gave me a calm nod. Just the land saying hello, he said. You belong to it now. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, not from fear, but from a profound sense of awe. The next day, a gruff teacher named Nate knocked on my door with a pot of something that smelled rich and savory. Stew, he grunted. You look like you're wasting away. He was a man of few words who I'd seen around the school, mostly keeping to himself. I was surprised. Thank you, I said. He glanced around my small living room and sighed. That fire's built all wrong. You're losing all your heat. He knelt down and expertly rearranged the kindling and logs. There, he said, satisfied. Now it can breathe. I had seen Nate a few times at staff meetings, and I was sure I'd heard him mutter something about outsiders with fancy ideas, but now he was here, making sure my house was warm. After we ate, he sat back. Seen a lot of teachers come through here, he said, his eyes narrowed. They show up full of talk. But when the first real snow hits, they're gone. I'm not going anywhere, I said quietly. He just studied me. We'll see, but he came back the next week with a load of firewood. At school, things were changing. The children started asking questions, not just about spelling, but about why the stars moved, why stories mattered, why people leave. And Jaden, he started to smile. Just a small, crooked twitch of his lips the first time I stumbled over a word in the local language and laughed at myself. Then, he brought me a painting of a leaf decorated with small blue markings. For protection, he whispered. For your cat, I tacked it to the wall above my desk. But the piece was short-lived. One afternoon, the classroom door flew open. A man strode in, handsome and slick in an expensive suit that looked out of place. I'm looking for Jaden Yazzie, he announced. He didn't need to introduce himself, the family resemblance was there. Hello, Victor, I said, standing up. He seemed momentarily surprised that I knew his name, then recovered. I'm his father's. Jaden had gone rigid in his chair, his hands balled into fists. Jaden, my boy, Victor said, his voice smooth as oil as he walked toward him. Your dad's here to take you for a few days. Just us. A special trip. The boy didn't move or speak, but I could see the panic behind his quiet facade. Is that all right, Jaden? I asked softly. He gave a tiny, jerky nod. Victor turned to me, his eyes sweeping over the room, the drum, and lingering on the painted leaf. So, you're the famous Mr. Marino. I've heard you've gotten quite involved with my ex-wife and my son. His tone was like poisoned honey. I care about him, I said, choosing my words with care. Both of them, so I'm sure you do, he replied, taking Jaden's hand. But let's not forget whose son he is. He swept out of the room in a cloud of expensive cologne and unspoken threats. That night, I sat on my porch with Trey, the painted leaf on my wall seeming to flutter in the breeze. I couldn't shake the image of Jaden's face, not angry or sad, just vacant, as if he had retreated to a place deep inside himself to weather the storm. Come back safely, Jaden, I whispered into the night. I'll be here, and Trey purred, like a promise. He returned 3 days later. I was organizing books when I saw him standing in the doorway, his backpack hanging low. He didn't say a word, just walked to his desk and began to write. I let him be. After class, he waited until everyone had left, then came over and pressed something small and cool into my hand. It was a dark, smooth stone with a single white line running through it like a crack of lightning. My mom says this kind is for sadness, he said quietly. I thought you might need it. My throat closed up. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded, curling my fingers around the stone. Thank you, I finally managed to whisper. In that small exchange, I knew a profound shift had occurred, not just for him, but for me as well. That evening, I ran into another teacher, Elias, at the small-town grocery. He stood by the coffee aisle, his knuckles white as he gripped his basket. I tried to walk past, but he blocked my way. You've really made yourself at home, haven't you? He said, his voice dripping with resentment. Elias, I said, trying to keep my tone even. I'm not looking for a fight. He stepped closer. You don't get it. You just waltz in here, take the job I wanted, take my place. You think you're one of us now because you teach the kids and burn some sage. The anger rose in my own chest, but I held it back. I didn't take anything from you, I said. And I'm not trying to replace anyone. His jaw was tight. You think she loves you, don't you? Who? I asked, though I knew. Don't play dumb, he sneered. We stood there in silence, and then I saw the anger in his face crack, revealing the pain underneath. I was here when Victor left, he said, his voice dropping. I was the one who helped Rose pick up the pieces. I was the one who sat with Jaden. I was here. I believe you, I said softly. I know you care. He looked away. Then why you? He asked, his voice raw. I didn't have a simple answer. I think, I said, it's because I wasn't trying to be what she needed. I just was. He didn't reply, just turned and walked off. At school, the whispers began. Parents avoided my gaze. Students started bringing me small gifts, woven bracelets, pouches of salt. A little girl gave me a carved piece of wood. My grandma says this will keep away the bad spirits you brought with you, she told me. I thanked her and added it to the collection in my desk drawer. I knew the source. Victor was in town, and his influence was palpable. He was telling people I was manipulating Rose, that I was filling Jaden's head with nonsense, that I was a corrupting influence. He even formally requested my removal at a school board meeting. I was ready to pack my bags. But then Nate, the gruff teacher who brought me stew, stood up. He spoke slowly and deliberately. I have taught at this school for 40 years, he said, his voice commanding the room. I have seen many teachers come and I have seen many go. But Mark Marino. He stayed. He stayed when things got hard. And these children, they listen to him. They trust him. Because he listens back, the room was silent. I didn't let myself cry, not until I was home, with Trey curled on my lap, his warmth a solid, grounding presence. That night, Jaden ran away. He appeared on my porch as dusk fell, his arms wrapped around his small frame. Dad's busy, he said, his voice empty. He's been on the phone all night with his lawyers. I sat down next to him and draped a blanket over our shoulders. Does your mom know you're here? She's at the school, talking to Irenaeus. I heard them say your name. I looked at him. What did you hear? He hesitated. That my dad wants to take me to the city. That he's going to win. The wind whistled through the trees. He's going to do what he always does, Jaden whispered. Take me somewhere new, and then leave again. I put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me. I'm not going anywhere, Jaden. He looked up at me, his eyes shining in the dim light. My mom told me she loves you. I froze for a second, then nodded. I love her, too. He held my gaze. Then I'm okay if you become my new dad. I smiled, feeling tears well in my eyes. Only if you're ready for that. No pressure. I'm ready, he said. And in that moment, under the vast desert sky, a child chose me. Winter arrived not as a storm, but as a deep, profound quiet. A blanket of white softened the landscape, and the air grew sharp and sacred. Rose started spending her evenings with me. She would arrive quietly, often with an offering, firewood, a book she thought I'd like, a bundle of dried herbs. She never asked for anything, she just shared the silence. Trey adored her, which was all the confirmation I needed. One night, I found her at my kitchen table, whittling a small block of cedar wood. What are you making? I asked. A box, she said without looking up. For the children's offerings. So the spirits feel remembered. When she was done, she handed it to me. It was simple and smelled of the forest. I carefully placed all the small charms and protective tokens the children had given me inside, one by one. Jaden came over most days after school, usually with Trey trotting at his heels. He brought his sketches, his questions, and sometimes just his quiet company. And I offered him what I had, my time, my patience, and a steady presence. Victor did not win. For all his threats and legal maneuvering, the court sided with Rose. Stability, truth, and real love had spoken louder. He left town without another word. Rose and I didn't celebrate. We just sat together by the fire, a single candle burning between us, Trey asleep on the rug. Are you okay? I asked. She nodded. He might be back someday. But we'll be ready. There was no sense of victory in her voice, only a deep and settled peace. One weekend, when the snow had begun to melt, she asked me to take a trip with her. We left Trey in Nate's care and drove her old truck high into the mountains, to where the roads disappeared. We walked in a silence so complete it felt holy. She led me to a hidden clearing where colorful ribbons, red, white, blue, green, were tied to tree branches, fluttering like silent prayers. In the center was an ancient, mossy stone altar. My grandmother used to bring me here, Rose said. She taught me to tie my hopes to the wind. She handed me a strip of blue cloth. What do I do? I asked. Tie it tight, she said. And ask for what your soul truly needs. Not what your mind thinks it wants. I closed my eyes, feeling the cold wind on my face. I thought of the life I had abandoned, the man I used to be, dutiful, silent, afraid. Then I tied my ribbon to a branch and whispered, "Let me stay true to myself." When I opened my eyes, she was watching me. "I brought you here for a reason," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't new or shiny, but old and handmade, the silver worn smooth with time, a piece of turquoise set in its center. "This was my grandmother's," she said, her voice soft. "She gave it to my mother, who gave it to me." She stepped closer and took my hand. "I am not a woman of many words, Mark. But when you came here, it felt like this land, which had been holding its breath, could finally exhale." My heart was pounding. "I think," she continued, "the wind has been calling our names for a very long time, leading us to this moment." She met my gaze, her eyes steady. "Will you marry me?" I didn't cry. I smiled. A real, steady smile. "Yes," I said. It wasn't because I needed to be rescued or because it was the next logical step. It was because, for the first time, the choice was entirely mine. The wedding was small, held in the spring when the wildflowers were blooming. The children made decorations from pine cones. Nate brought a huge pot of his stew. Jaden, with a flower tucked behind his ear, walked me down the path, beaming. Rose waited for me under the open sky, the mountains standing as our witnesses. Trey sat between us, his tail flicking contentedly. When I spoke my vows, I didn't promise forever. I promised honesty, I promised patience, I promised to always be present. That night, sitting beside the woman I loved and the boy who had chosen me, I realized this wasn't a second chance at life. This was the first time I had ever truly lived. Looking back, the greatest lesson was this: life doesn't always require a detailed map. Sometimes, all it needs is a single, brave moment of saying no to the path someone else has chosen for you. I spent years being dutiful and quiet, and it almost erased me. The instant I stepped into the unknown, I started to find myself. I learned that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person handing you a stone, or a woman carving a box, or a cat who decides your lap is the safest place in the world. I learned that love doesn't save you, it sees you. And when it is real, it doesn't demand you change, it simply makes space for you to be who you are. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It arrives in seasons, on the wind, in the flicker of a fire, in whispered hopes tied to a tree. So if you find yourself on the edge of something that feels terrifying and wild, maybe that is exactly where your real life is waiting to begin. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be brave enough to take the first step. I was. And it led me home.